Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for May 15, 2017. We'll begin with a special order count. Oh, wait, do we want to go to back first, or just keep going? No. Okay. Special order calendar, continued hearings. Item number 1, 120-93BZ, 222-19, Linda Boulevard, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 2, 129-97BZ, 150-65 Cross Island Parkway, Queens.
They submitted a request to withdraw without prejudice.
Item number 3, 169-98BZ, 3141 Bailey Avenue, the Bronx.
The applicant submitted a letter explaining that the tenant has made bits of progress in cleaning up the site, and they included some photos. Our last hearing on this was in September, and there we observed that the site was in very poor condition, and we directed the owner to clean up the site and to make specific improvements, specifically to replace the fence with a 6-foot high and opaque fence, except at the wrought iron fencing on top of the brick wall, to remove the tarp, not replace it, to remove the engines that are stored outside, to clarify the work that is being done at the site, and to eliminate all work done outside, and to clean up the area between the buildings, provide a plan showing landscaping, and also showing fencing and lighting. While we did receive a requested maneuverability diagram, it and the proposed plans still show the curb cut that's essential to the maneuverability on Bailey being removed. We've not received a lighting or landscape plan, and the photos still show the site needs to be cleaned up and the fencing replaced with the 6-foot high opaque fence, and the ripped tarp, it shows it replaced with another tarp that's soon to be ripped again because that's tarps. My feeling about that is if a covering over the car in that corner is needed for some reason, it needs to be a permanent solution, not a tarp. But I'm curious about why you cover a car unless you're working outside, right? Not allowed to work outside, so not sure what else that's about unless something's drying while you're waiting for, I can't imagine what it is. So the owner of and I want to say that it's the owner of the property that's responsible for maintaining the property, and it's the owner's relationship with his tenant in terms of who takes that responsibility and pays for it. But if the tenant isn't doing it, then the owner has to step in and do it. And my feeling is until this is done according to the board's direction, the board will not consider extending the term of the use and could vote to terminate the use because it's been going on like this for a very, very long time, and the owner seems to be relying on the tenant's neglect not to bring this up to speed.
I did go to the site to see the progress, and the fence was repainted, but the fence is in terrible shape in terms of it's mismatched pieces of fence of different heights and types that have just been painted white. And so I agree with you, at the very first step, it needs to be completely replaced with matching 6-foot tall opaque fence. It's just, no matter how much you would try and paint it, it's not going to look good because it's all mismatched and different. I didn't see the tarp actually when I went there, but it could be that I just didn't get a very good look inside because parts of the fence are kind of sort of opaque, kind of in a mismatched way. But I fully agree with you, there's no need for a tarp if there's no outdoor work, and there should be no outdoor work.
Anybody else?
The only other thing was that they said they removed the outdoor tire rack, and I was just wondering where they put it.
Okay. Thanks.
Move on. Yeah. New cases, item number 4, 18385BZ, 206-808 20th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we need a community board recommendation. There are recent photos of the interior and exterior of the site that show that the walls are in need of repair and painting, and that there's razor wire on top of the fencing, which needs to be removed. The land use map shows the site is now surrounded by residential uses, except an adjacent site at 204 20th Street. I think they should provide more information on the immediately adjacent uses. The original approval stated that the site was adjacent to a live poultry market, which was part of the board's, which affected the board's decision. So I'd like to know what the adjacent uses are now, and what the reason for the fencing on the roof is. Obviously to prevent people from climbing over, but is that really still needed? And the approval was for parking of cars, and there are trucks that are parked on the interior. I understand that's probably necessary for the business to operate, so I don't have a concern, but it's not what was stated in the approval. So, anybody else?
When I went by the site, it was closed, but there was like a forklift parked on the sidewalk right in front of the building. So I don't know whether they're just using the sidewalk for their operations, but that should not be, especially with residential.
I noticed the same thing, but then I went around again, and that forklift belonged to the business that's across the street, and they were picking up, I mean, I don't know if it's the same forklift, but I did notice a forklift lying around there, and they were picking up their delivery goods that was on one side, on the subject sites.
It's a wholesale beverage place.
A wholesale
Oh, so they were
beverage
lifting beverages.
They
From-
use their sidewalk.
From that sidewalk, and that's why the forklift, in my case at least, was there. So initially, I also was wondering what was them doing there, and it seemed it was not for that business, it was for the across the street business.
It's really interesting that the owner of the business would allow the sidewalk in front of his business to be used for the business across the street. That's really kind of strange. Come, please park your, your vehicles on my sidewalk.
Well, it's where the parking was available, and that's when the delivery was happening, and so.
It's really kind of strange.
It's kind of interesting.
Well, when I visited the site, there's graffiti on the roll-down gate, and some on the building. The front of the building has to be repaired and painted. And from the photos, it looked like there were some compressed gas cylinders just thrown in with the rest of the storage. They're not properly, put in a container and roped off and stored properly. And
But you
They should
didn't see it
explore-
up. You didn't see the gate up.
no, you can't see inside. This is just from the photos, but there is still a wholesale chicken place next door on one side, and there's a residential building on the other, and I believe there's residential to the rear. It would be nice for them to somehow screen their storage in some way from those rear buildings and clean it up a bit.
Well, in the photos, it looks like for the photo, they organized the stuff,
Well,
right?
it didn't look good in the photos.
No, I just thought, if you're storing stuff outside, and the fact that they kind of assembled it in little groups, even though it's not like a display in a store, but seemed like they were taking good care of how they kept the stuff on the site, but the stuff is just disparate things that don't assemble by category, sort of. And I think what's difficult about this is it's surrounded by these residential uses that can look into the lot, and it was granted as open storage. I mean, you could say, well, what if there was a roof on top, then you wouldn't see all that stuff, but then it's not open storage anymore.
Right.
So if it was granted that way, I'm not sure how they can conceal,
Well, I was wondering what they're actually using the building for, because this is actually a new tenant from the last time we did an extension of term. So if they could give us photos of the interior, if there's a possibility of moving some of that stuff inside the building.
Okay.
Did we all see the gates closed on our site visits?
I saw it
Would you say
closed.
No, because when I went on a site visit, the gate was closed, and it was
No.
during office hours, so the building looked pretty close to me. So I was just.
Same here.
Yes, same thing. There was no activity,
There was no activity.
no signage.
So maybe it's used in association with another business someplace, and they store like building materials here. normal. Yeah.
Item number 5, 1-95BZ, 117 7th Avenue South, Manhattan.
Okay, we have, Community Board recommends approval. We have Fire Department objection of May 9th, so just last week, to, about open safety violations that need to be corrected now prior to the board's vote. Two of them they're both violations. One of them has to do with a certificate of fitness and for the fire alarm, and the other for fire-rated self-closing door. I don't think I had any other comment. Anybody else?
Good. Item number 6, 7595BZ, 1635 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, again, Community Board recommends approval. We also need proof that the sprinklers and fire alarms were installed according to the plans on the prior approvals, but to be more specific, fire alarms were shown on the prior approvals, but the current plans say on every plan, it says, for instance, EP-01 states, entire F3 use is fully sprinklered. So they should provide proof of the sprinklering, and then we need the fire department sign off. Anybody else with that?
Appeals calendar, continued hearing item, item number 7, 2016 4253A, 565 St. John's Place, Brooklyn.
So this one, they submitted some information about work being done not according to the approved plans. And the way it was phrased by the applicant is the applicant proposed that we look at that work as simply a reduction in the area by 741 square feet, or 25% of the total built area, and somehow to discount those expenditures and loss by that amount. Not that they actually did the math for us, as far as I could tell. I look instead, I don't look at it that way at all, to the fact that all of the exterior walls and anything contained within them on that side of the building, because it's all on one side of the building, all that area that was built illegally would have to be removed and rebuilt. So that's a completely different kind of cost than just taking 25% of the total. That would include joists, because the joists are actually the wrong length, so they have to be taken down and cut or something. Floors, roof, exterior walls. There's even an enclosure for a staircase, so you have to reframe the staircase. There may have even installed the staircase. I couldn't tell that from the submissions.
Well, it's a wooden staircase, it might be a temporary staircase.
Right, that might be
so
temporary.
yeah.
Usually they deliver the metal stair somewhere during the process, but maybe, I don't know if they installed the stair. And any other work that was built to the property line or within that setback would have to be removed. And then, and the cost to do that, and then the cost to build back after, healing the scar tissue and all that would have to be also deducted from the expenditures, so the owner cannot benefit from any of the illegal work. I also note that the owner, I just wanted to note because we know who the owner is, and the owner of this property is listed by New York City Public Advocate as one of 2016's worst landlords. They also submitted checks for soft costs of $21,700 for expediting and plans, and invoices/credit card statements for hard costs of $182,000. But again, I say that those all have to be modified to reflect demolition plus reconstruction. With respect to the invoices, checks, and bank statements submitted, many construction projects appear to have been going on at the same time under the same credit card account. So I don't see, and there's no kind of job number reference, which is what you normally do. You put some kind of a reference so that the credit card, so that your accountant kind of, or your bookkeeper can figure out which job to charge it to. there isn't any information like that, so it's kind of arbitrary, like they just, looks like they could have just picked anything from there and said,
For the hard costs.
for the hard costs.
Yeah, the soft costs, they wrote checks, I believe.
Yeah, the soft costs actually had checks.
Yeah.
But the hard costs, they seem to have been using some sort of strange credit card deal where I pay your credit card bills and then you don't charge me.
It's not direct verification.
No. Right.
Here's the invoice, here's the credit card or the check.
Right, go
Well,
on.
I think that the information about any financial analysis that they gave us was really complicated, and it's very hard to even say that, okay, now they've satisfied any of the findings, because they had to answer two different issues. One of the issues was, what was the work done on the date of rezoning and how much did that cost? Because they're taking it from a later date in October,
Right.
which doesn't count. And the other thing was, how much of this work was legal work that was done according to plan and how much was illegal work and shouldn't be counted, and the money associated with that. And to me, the answer that they gave us doesn't address either of them adequately, because like you said, you can't just take a 25% discount off of the price and go, let's just take 25% off, because it's not that easy to do. The illegal structure is a good portion of the site going
Yeah.
all the way back, and everything that rests on it has to be redone. So it's almost as if you didn't do anything legally.
Right.
Even if the illegal part is only a portion, because once you start peeling off everything that has to be redone legally, you're almost peeling off the entire 2 floors.
Right.
So
Right.
that's a
Yeah,
problem.
Yeah.
You know, and the proof of what was done and what actually is lost in terms of serious loss is not making much sense, because they're talking about the cost to demolish everything and reconstruct is more than the cost to construct to begin
Right,
with. It's
right.
sitting there at $700,000 to demo and redesign. That doesn't make any
No,
sense
doesn't
either,
make
when
any
your total
sense.
cost to construct is supposed to be in excess of $500,000.
Right.
So there's that issue, and then we had told them we want the total cost of the construction the total cost of the the construction project to be in today's dollars, and they gave us something that makes it look as if it would be maybe $40,000 more today than the original cost back in 2013. So that also is hard to believe, because we know that construction costs went up a great deal over the past 5 years. So I don't think we're any closer in this application than we were on the first hearing to making the findings.
And I'd have to say that, having managed businesses myself, this is a very, let's say, unusual accounting system to pay a contractor by paying his credit card bills, or using it's more like he's using my credit card in order for me to somehow pay him back for the construction. To me, that looks like some method of avoiding some kind of reporting, and my feeling about that is, if that's what the method was, then you didn't keep an accounting the way you would have been required to keep an accounting by law. And so when you come to us and you haven't kept a legal accounting, then you can't expect us to now accept an accounting that's really not legitimate. They don't seem to have any books, any proof of payment against invoices, nothing. So I look at that, and I don't want to be complicit in their strange possible method of having built this project. I mean, it doesn't seem like a legitimate accounting approach.
It's definitely not transparent at the
Yes.
very least.
Right. And why they do that, I can't really figure it out, but I don't really want to know.
And then there's still the question of whether they did work past the rezoning date. I don't think that was really sufficiently explained, and the violation was upheld by ECB.
Right.
So we don't know how much work was done after the rezoning. And they will have to do major modifications if they intend to keep some of the 6th floor and roof. They have to have a whole different structural system, because now they're using the bearing walls, and both in the front and at the rear, because the rear has to come in about a foot. So you know, it's a major job.
Right, which is probably why they built to the property, to the walls in the first place. Contractor said, I'm not doing that.
Well, yeah, you kind of wonder, how come, you know, the affidavit that says we completed all this work, you know, it can't be verified because they didn't complete the structure and the exterior walls and all the rest of it. Because it was done, you know, not to plan or
Right.
not according to permit.
Right,
So how much can we actually accept?
right. And then I also have a question that goes to the, like, the base of the argument about their ability to add these floors, because they claim to DOB that it's an Article 5 multiple dwelling. But when you look at Article 5 of the multiple dwelling law, it's very, very specific. It says that it only applies to post-1929 buildings and no others. And then when you look at the technical procedure notice, it says that you can be an Article 5 building only if the building had been altered under pre-1968 code. So in other words, you might qualify as a tenement building prior to after 1929, but only if between 1929 and 1967, basically, you brought the building up to what's considered Article 5 level. They didn't do that. They're proposing to do that somehow or other with this application, which I don't see any signs of. So I think DOB maybe didn't understand the question they were asked. I don't actually think they're allowed to have treated this as an Article 5
Yeah,
building.
I didn't understand their reasoning at all,
So,
why it was not an Article 7.
right, exactly. So,
Just to add to what has been said, you know, and it goes back to the question of can the illegality of it be cured, given the way the structure has been built and the cost that has been indicated just doesn't bear out. I mean, replacing the bearing wall and trying to replacing that extension and providing another bearing wall, the cost that's being shown, if I'm comparing the serious loss data that's been provided from initially and currently, it's not that much, which doesn't seem reasonable for the kind of structural work that would have to be done to bear the load of 2 additional floors. And then the other question I have is the replacement of the rafter beam, the rafter with the beam, once the 4th floor tenants identified issues. That goes to show that the structure that was built structurally was not sound and then did cause structural damage,
Yes.
which required replacement with the beam. So again, I'm questioning the legality of
right.
the whole building, and therefore, is it therefore 100% built structurally?
Right, but and then the other question is, then, if it was built completely in violation of the approved plans, is it a valid permit?
Well, the DOB said the permit was valid, but the construction is not valid.
Right, but that's the part I've never really understood, don't know whether the courts have ever decided this. At what point does a permit cease to be valid when there's a lot of work to be done? DOB usually takes a position, if it's curable, it's still a valid permit. But is reconstructing the whole thing more or less from scratch considered curable?
But we've had cases where there was a problem with the plans that was curable.
Right.
This is where you had approved plans, you had a permit, and then they constructed something completely different.
Right. So I would have to go back to the question, that's the threshold question on all these cases is, did they have a valid permit pursuant to which they built and vested, arguably, by the vesting date, or by the vesting date, or by if we're doing this as common law, right? So we have to start off with a valid permit, and I'm not convinced it was a valid permit. From the get-go, they weren't planning on building according to the drawings. So,
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how they never pointed that out
No.
in any of their
they never,
paperwork, in the beginning. It's
no, we
like
found it by
going to
all
the
of
site.
us, like, huh?
Yeah. It's like, that's not what it's supposed to look like.
No. Okay. All right.
Go on. Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 8, 4415BZ, 145 Central Park North Manhattan.
Sorry. Oh, boy. This one also was withdrawn, requested to withdraw.
Item number 9, 8815BZ, 1834 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
We do have community board approval now. We were missing that before. There is a new objection that we hadn't received before from the neighbor to the rear. It's an objection in late April after the last hearing. Was it? Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I think I missed it, but and I just wanted to clear that up. So they said that the extension will be too close to their house. But when I look at the Sanborn map and you look at the extension, most of it's coming behind that tenement building. Only a little bit is behind the house, so I'm not sure if those neighbors can quite, have all the information. They did correct the question about the 3 feet between the garage and the house. And when the never-ending process of computers deciding what dimensions are, it says 3 feet 0 1/4. So I dare the contractor to snap that line. They didn't, however, respond to, and maybe they can do this quickly, to our comment about the roof connection to the main building and the rear addition being awkward. Remember we talked about that? That they just sort of stuck it on, and yeah, it looks like it's a kind of a waterproofing nightmare the way they've handled it. So maybe they could take a quick look at that. Anybody else?
Continued hearing items, item number 10, 24014BZ, 1620 Shore Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Okay. Sorry. We have a lot of this, okay. So the owner's representative has been replaced since the last hearing, which was exactly a year ago. Over a year ago, we had many, many open issues. The new cover letter that was included with this submission does not go systematically through our open issues and should have done that since we've been at this case for a very long time. Much of the holdup on this case was related to the neighbors' enforcement of a light and air easement, which I have to say had the effect of obscuring the substantive issues. So I'm going to repeat what the substantive issues are that should have been addressed. They had to demonstrate that an adequate amount of existing structure is to remain, constitute an enlargement. The drawings still show all the joists to be replaced. Plans don't show the scope of the area to be retained. There's a typical house lifting detail that they provided, but it's not tied to the specifics of this house. They need to establish that the existing rear yard condition is legal non-complying or obtain a waiver, an objection from DOB to request the rear yard waiver. They need to reduce the massing at the rear of the building to comport with neighborhood character. The height had been reduced from 47 feet to 45 feet to the peak, but wasn't adequate or justified except by a statement at the hearing without providing us any kind of backup in support of it. They state in the statement of facts that there's another house the same height as this one behind. They don't provide us with any information to substantiate that. The photos that were provided in support of an upper front deck show also upper rear decks. This is on other houses, which goes to the comment that we've had at other hearings about reducing the massing at the rear. All those houses that they showed had front and back decks. Nothing more was provided to support any argument that a 3-story reduced rear yard will not adversely affect the adjacent neighbors. They need to address clearly compliance with floodplain requirements, including the mitigation measures. Looks like some of this was done, but not all of it. They need to show the correct perimeter wall height dimensions and dimensions relative to the design flood elevations. That does look like it was done. They need to eliminate the new cellar floor slab that's below the base flood elevation. They didn't do that. And with respect to the neighbor, again, submitted a long letter about more concerns that have to do with the easement. I need to point out for the neighbor's benefit, I don't think the neighbor's here, but that the BSA is not a court or a surveyor. The applicant provided us with an updated survey from a licensed surveyor, and that's what we go with. As far as I can tell, the decimal numbers used on the survey for the dimension of the side yard and the distance of the extension from the property line match the fractional inches dimensions that are provided on the plans. With respect to other features of the extension and its relationship to the terms of the easement, the board is not an enforcer or interpreter of the scope of the easement. That's for lawyers to argue or a court to decide. Anybody else?
Yeah, I actually went and looked at the site and looked at the surrounding context and condition. And what I came away with was that the third floor extension seemed reasonable to me. The existing building has a rear yard that is 19 foot 8 inches deep, and they're proposing to increase that to 23 foot 9 inches, which is corresponding to the other rear yards that are abutting this property. And furthermore, the height of the roof line of the third floor is kind of sloping away from the side lot line, which is which some buildings have done. The abutting building has not. One of the other one has, which also would reduce the appearance of the bulk in the rear. And the building abutting the site is, on both sides, they're built to the maximum permitted building height of 35 feet. And the subject building is proposing a 31-foot height that is measured from the design flood elevation.
Sorry, say that once more. The building abutting the site is built
Height of 35 feet.
built to from
From their base plate. This is built to the height of 31 from the design flood elevation. So this would be a permitted height for any of the other buildings if they were to be built to the design flood elevation. So I think we should be, I measured using the design flood elevation to determine the height of the building. Furthermore, I think the massing has been set back from the front yard, which pretty much is the context of that block front. Most of the massing in the front has been set back, and that they have shown those samples where the buildings are set back from the front. There are some buildings where they are extending all the way to the rear, and some are not extended all the way to the rear. What is important to keep in mind is that unlike most of the lots in this area that are 100 foot deep, this and its abutting 3 lots are 90 foot deep. So that does take away their ability to build onto the rear yard. So I think, assuming if this was a 30 foot deep, it was 100 foot deep, this building is looking, at a height where they would be allowed. So I think this is reasonable given the narrowness of the site and given other easement easement obligations that this property has to abide by on both sides of the lot, and there's an encroachment on its own property from the building to the rear. It is hemmed in, and I think they have made an effort to try to scale down the building to the best of its effort. So I'm satisfied.
Anybody else?
I felt that they had, put all, the only thing that's remaining in the side yard regarding that easement is what was there originally, a side yard entry. And so to me, and it looked to me that it complied with Appendix G, and they had a visual mitigation measure. So I didn't have any further issues.
Okay. So I was going through the list of all the things we had asked for, like, not even
A long
May.
time
It was
ago.
really a long time ago. It was like in December we had asked for those things. And the argument about the easement, and in particular, the applicant's, the owner's representative who, let's say, wasn't responding to a lot of issues. So I just, I reiterated them because we didn't get a specific answer to things. So,
So I think it would be helpful for the applicant to just to go back to all the recordings and I think they have responded it in bits and pieces. It would be good to just put together a comprehensive list of all the questions that were raised and the responses that's been provided. Would that?
Yeah.
I would highlight the issue with the joists and retention of the
Yes.
building is a threshold issue.
Right.
Yes.
That it strikes me, they can keep this building, they just need to show us that they are doing it. Like,
Yeah.
right, their
Right.
plans sort of contradict their intent, I think.
yes, right. Okay. I mean, I think one of the problems we had was we were not able often, most of the time, to speak with the architect. So if the architect comes, then we can clear this up, maybe even at the hearing, right? Although the drawings do need to be modified to show the retention of building, or floor area. Yeah, okay.
Item number 11, 30214BZ, 4504 Francis Lewis Boulevard, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 12, 2515BZ, 71 Lewis Avenue, the Brooklyn.
Also an adjournment.
Thought it said the Bronx there, sorry. Item number 13, 1516, 5615BZ, 2124 Avenue J, Brooklyn.
We do have a community board recommendation that approved on condition that no mechanical equipment be located on the west side yard, which is the skinny side yard. They did they submitted a revised DOB projection to include the open space ratio and the FAR. I thought they were very responsive to all of our comments. They established clearly on the drawings that the existing building will be retained, but enlarged slightly to the front yards and part of one side yard at the first floor, then enlarged more significantly in the same areas at the second floor. I believe the issue also with the cellar foundation was corrected. They ended up lowering the requested FAR to .93 and showed the required landscaping. A 1929 sandboard was provided to establish the pre-existing non-compliant garage condition, except to say that I couldn't read it. I don't know if anyone else could, so I'd like the applicant to just bring in a clean copy of the 29 Sanborn. And they also, not sure why, they provided a shadow study showing me that in summer there will be no sun-warmed breakfasts on either the front or the rear yard in the May to June 21 analysis period. I'm not sure why they submitted that, but it looks to me that really the rear yard has the existing garage, and they were showing the shadows cast by the existing garage on the rear, so they're not an incremental shadow study. So, you know, shadow studies, it's very nice to see a shadow study, but be careful what it's for.
If I seem to recall, the neighbor adjacent or to the rear had concern that the enlargement wouldn't block their light and air.
Yeah, light and air is different than shadow, right?
Well,
Arguably, light,
and shadow.
light.
So I think
One way.
this was one way, of it. And the way the sun is coming, I mean, both is.
But the thing about it is, when you do a shadow study, it has to be an incremental shadow study. It can't be the shadow that's cast by the existing building, because they've been living with that for a long time. I think the shadow that's cast in the rear yard, where up until, you know, where the study actually shows that the rear yard is in shadow during the times when you'd sit in the backyard and have breakfast, I think that's cast by the existing garage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think if they just kind of make the point that this increment does not really affect the abutting building. And
Well, but that's, I don't think they made the point. I think that's because it's not an incremental shadow study, it was frightening. So, and I've actually had this problem with shadow studies in my own work, where people aren't sensitive to what a shadow study means to a person who's not familiar with looking at one. So anyway, I just want to say that, and for the owner, if they're of the neighboring property, if they're listening, that I believe that the fear about the light in the rear is the same as what you have today.
I just have one comment,
Okay.
and that is drawing number E13, which is a section showing the long section, though the title list calls it cross-section. Just a minor correction as for a completeness of the package, that's all.
Okay.
So they just need to provide the cross-section instead of the long section from the cross-section.
But that's just the title of.
This is just mistitled?
It's mistitled, yeah. So whichever way it is, if they're supposed to show cross-section, should show cross-section.
Okay.
So.
Okay,
needs to
it's
be
just
that.
correct the title, fast.
Yeah.
Item number
Because I
four.
don't- I'm just sorry, I don't think there are any other open issues. I don't want labeling a section to hold up
Yeah.
project. Okay.
Item number 14, 17215BZ, 14645 22nd Avenue, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 15, 23415BZ, 1223 67th Street, Brooklyn.
They did provide a ZRD1 about the base plane location at elevation 60 feet, which is really high. Still, the issue, I think, is neighborhood character relative to the proposed height. Other buildings in the neighborhood are measured off curb. I find actually the base plane analysis a bit strange also, because the C of O describes the first level as a basement and not as a cellar. So if the top of the hill were the base plane, that level would have been a cellar. And so I'm not sure how it gets characterized one way as an existing building and the other way as a proposed building, and it's very confusing to me. They provided a 1929 Sanborn, but I don't see what it establishes with respect to any existing non-compliances, especially the location of the street wall and the steps and yards that are located on city property. The proximity to the side lot line is unclear in the Sanborn, and of course, you can never really tell, so it's really hard to know whether it's really close or kind of a little bit, complying. They also provided approved 2007 plans under the R5 regulations, and with respect to the front yard condition, it says that the building is existing non-complying, but the building, but I wonder in terms of that, and I think the drawings show you that the building was not already 29 feet above the base plane, and with a side yard width of 9 foot 9 inches and a 29-foot wide front wall. They actually, in this new construction, they built out the front wall to square it off, basically. And the existing building drawings and the 1986 survey show that it was a 2.5-story frame building. So it looks like there was an enlargement at the front that increased the degree of noncompliance. So, and unless the R5 regulations in 2007 were different, I don't see.
No, there was a 10-foot front yard, I believe.
Right.
So and you can't you can't build in the front yard under the special permit, so it's something we couldn't approve under
Right.
the special permit.
So they're stuck with that one. Also, I was thinking maybe in this, so they have a 1986 C of O. I'm not sure whether there was a change in the street wall regulations that made that, that somehow legalized the 1986 condition. I don't know. I was trying to figure out like how you can make this okay, but I can't figure out how to make it okay.
On the plans, the 1986 plans, it looked to me that the plans misrepresented the depth of the front yard by showing it as being about 9.5 feet instead of 3.5 feet, because they were actually showing the amount that the building extended out in the front to the entrance, which is, 4.5 feet on city property, which we can't approve.
Right.
So they have construction on city property. I believe the 1986 plans misrepresented the front yard. They have an enlargement in the front yard in 2007, which we can't approve. It goes on from there. And then the plans show that the ZRD1 of 60 feet is now somehow magically 77.5 feet.
Oh,
So I don't understand how one got to the other.
so the ZRD one that establishes 60.03.
Right.
You see on the plan 70 something?
Right, they show base plane grade 60.03/77.5, like those are
The
the
same.
same numbers, and I don't know where they got that one from, because it's certainly not going from Brooklyn Datum to NAVD 88, so I really don't understand the, I don't know how to correlate the
Yeah.
ZRD1 to their survey, their grades, and what they're showing.
Okay,
So-
that I didn't notice, okay.
I had an opportunity to do a field visit there and kind of take in all the building typologies that are there and the building topography, and the topography of the area. I think what's interesting is, and I found it interesting, is that there are buildings on that particular block from 3 different periods. The most recent one is the 1960s, where you have the buildings set to the curb line and you have the parking lot in the front yard. Then there is the going back buildings from the 1940s, which is the garden type apartment. You have a set of stairs that goes down to the lower level and you have the apartment. And then the buildings from 1910, which is what the subject site is from. There are actually 5 remaining buildings from that 1910 period that were built exactly the same way what this building is built to. Only things that added their own ornamentations as each one went along over the years. And what is interesting is all of these buildings, the buildings from 1960s, 1940s, 1910, all of them have maintained that same so-called property line that the building from the 1920s had. So every one of them have something, their staircases are leading from the city property line. The 1940s buildings are also, they also have their stairs leading from the city property line. The 1920s buildings were also, these were buildings, and somehow these buildings, they have, I think, retained the original grade, which, where the grade steeps up from 67th Street to the rear by 10 foot. So there was an uphill, and you can see that in these buildings. And these buildings are at a higher elevation than the buildings that are on 66th Street. And so all of these 5 buildings that were built in 1910, they had their garage on the side lot, but all the way in the front, right up to their property line, some even encroaching onto what was then, whether that was a city property or not, we don't know. But all of them have the staircase starting from that, what we are calling city property line, which kind of goes not straight, goes side, then makes another zig and a zag, and then goes up. And all the ground floor is basement. And then the real floor starts from that one flight up, that's the first floor, then you have the second floor, and then you have the attic. And the garages, now few of the buildings have removed their garages and pushed it all the way to the back with a driveway to the back, and some of them have still retained it. What this particular property did is it enhanced its architectural beauty of it, if you want to call it, by taking that low side wall that wraps around the staircase leading to the first floor and just extended up to match the height of the garage. The garage is set back just that the wall is sticking out. So it would, I'm just doing the historical sleuthing here. And I think this is something that has been there from 1910. It would be helpful if we can get Sanborn maps step by step showing how that neighborhood evolved from 10, 20, 30, 40. And I think that would help us establish what the base plan is, what the basement is, and why we have the right now, the condition that we have, which is portion of the property encroaching into the city property. So I think once we can put that aside, then we can focus on the special permit part of it.
Right, but we still have a problem that it's one, so they did show us these drawings from 1986, for which they received the C of O. So C of O says it's a legal condition because there it is, right? So if we use the 86 drawings as the base, the legal base, they've still modified, so understanding that brownstones all over the city have their entry portions on city property. So it's a standard thing to do in many parts of the city, right? But the bigger issue in terms of the front is that there was this existing non-compliant condition allowed in 1986 by permit, right? But now they've increased the degree of non-compliance by extending the width of that front portion all the way into the side yard that they didn't have before. So if you look at the 86 drawings, it says 21 foot something for the width of the front of the street wall. Then there's this curve, and then it sets back like, I don't know, 6 feet, 8 feet, something like that. Then there's some kind of a stair, and then that squares off, and then you have the side yard. What they did on this project was they pulled the whole thing forward, so there's an area.
Vertically.
And vertically.
In the most recent.
Yeah, 2007 drawings, right?
To the third floor.
So they added the third floor and they squared it off. So there's two directions they went where they increased the degree of noncompliance, not saying that the original street wall line wasn't a legitimate location for the existing building, because they got a C of O, right? But that they can't have gotten, I don't know what they said. I know what the drawings say. The drawings say existing noncompliance, and that was it. So they didn't show that there was new work being done within the non-complying front yard on the drawing.
There may be allowances, and we have to look at the history of the zoning here. If it was an R4 or R5, I'm not sure
Right.
if it's an R5, but some of the zoning districts allow vertical enlargements
Right.
despite non-compliances, and that may have been how they did
That's-
some of them.
That's how, right, so that might have been how they went up.
Yeah, that's
But
how-
not
yeah.
how they went to the side. And that's, the side is,
But the most
When I
recent
can't
one, they were
figure
in
it out.
R4, right?
yeah, well, so, right, so, the story here is that they designed it under the R5 regulations, even though it should have been designed under the R4 regulations. That's basically why they're here, because it shouldn't have been designed under the R5. And it's not a question of vesting, it just, the zoning had already changed and the architect was still merrily working in an R5. I guess what happens when you don't update your books. So, yeah, so we do have that problem. The other thing was, on drawing A09, it seems to indicate that some of the front wall at the second floor was removed because of the hatching. Seems to indicate that that's an area to be removed, but that's not what appears to have happened in section, because that would have effectively reduced the degree of noncompliance if they had actually cut that back.
No, it used to be that the second floor overhung
Overhung, and they
the
moved.
first floor. So they did pull the second floor back,
Okay,
but now it's like a 3-story vertical wall.
right,
So they did reduce the degree of noncompliance
okay.
in the front.
They don't
They
show
took the
that
old-
in the section where they would have showed dash lines for removal of structure and all that stuff. That's part of it, to understand the removal of structure, right?
Yeah.
And then also, they make reference to the survey, that in the new survey that is supposed to be indicating the perimeter wall height of the adjacent property.
And they
right?
compare it to, no, they compare their perimeter wall height to the roof of the adjacent building.
Okay.
And say they're about the same. But this
Okay.
is a peaked roof.
Yeah.
And they're saying our perimeter wall height is okay because we match the roof.
Okay, so
But
that's
I've
not how it
never,
works.
that's apples and oranges.
Right. So I think for sure with this one, we need to have an architect. I don't know if the same architect is working on this, but we really need an architect to be talking to us about this. Yeah, I don't know if the applicant is an architect. Not sure.
No, the applicant's not an architect, she's an attorney, but your architect will be
Right.
tomorrow?
No, there's no speaking, okay. So we need the architect of record, because there's still got to be an architect of record on this in order to cure this. Okay.
Item number 16, 27315BZ, 11043 168th Street, Queens.
Okay. They provided many new materials to respond to our comments. There's a vacant lot study, but actually I didn't see what argument it makes. There are 5 vacant lots of similar or narrower width within the 400 feet. The statement of facts says that many are held in common ownership, so it didn't say it on that plan, which it should have done, right? But the statement of facts says that many of those lots are held in common ownership, but they didn't provide any backup for that. And so that would help to establish that this is distinguished from those lots. Yeah.
Also, the vacant lot study, they didn't include the lots that are being used for parking, which I felt they should have.
Yeah. We also asked at the last hearing for deed evidence at the subject lot.
Right.
That it was not held in common ownership. I did think they provided a very clear, I love that open area study that this architect does. It's actually really helpful. That shows the spaces between the buildings. So you get a sense of what the character of the neighborhood is with respect to side yards. Anybody else? Other comment?
I just agree with you. They need to establish exactly which of those other lots are owned in conjunction with or used in conjunction with the neighboring lots for them to prove the uniqueness finding.
Okay.
Item number 17, 2016 4211BZ, 1052 East 23rd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they provided a 1950 sandboard map that shows the existing rear yard extension, and they clarified the area of enlargements with the hatching, which made it a lot easier to understand what's going on. And so it's clear that it's only the first floor and a tiny portion of the second floor at the rear that's being enlarged. So this is actually, compared to so many, a very modest application.
Go. Item number 18, 2016 4147BZ, 57-12 58th Place, Queens.
As we requested, they showed that the project would meet the findings for the city planning authorization under section 42-47A, which establishes bulk criteria for residential uses in M11D districts. I'm still confused about the lesser variance scenario, which we talked about the last time. It didn't change. It's the same exact bulk as the proposed, so I don't see how it's a lesser variance. It's just kind of like taking out, rental space So I don't see how that is a qualifying lesser variance. We had made a comment at the last one that the bulkhead was very large and they should reduce it. Instead, they eliminated the stair bulkhead, and I caution them that this is with 3 units, a multiple dwelling. And as far as I know, neither the Department of Buildings and perhaps multiple dwelling law allows you to have a hatch and a ladder to get to the roof when it's a 3-family unit. So they need to verify that with DOB. Also, they have to verify that the bedroom at the first floor unit complies with the minimum sizes in the multiple dwelling law, since it's only 7 foot 6 inches wide. And I think the first bedroom might need to be 8 feet wide. And also that the corridor widths meet ADA requirements, especially at the approach to the bathroom. I actually don't think it does. Also, there is only one means of egress from this multiple dwelling, and I'm not sure that meets either the multiple dwelling law or the building code. So, I mean, kind of all in all, when I look at that little unit on the ground floor, it looks really like it should be a duplex to the upstairs unit, because it's so compromised by the parking space. We had also asked for more information to support the height of the building at 3 stories versus the adjacent 2-story residential structures, and most other structures in the area are 2 stories. The statement of facts talks about the height of the little kind of factory building down the street, but when you just look at the neighborhood in general, everything's 2 stories. So I just would need, this building isn't proposed to be much taller than, the parapet wall makes it look taller than that little commercial building next door, but only a little bit. It's just that I don't see how you make the argument that 3 stories is typical of the neighborhood. And the statement of fact says the land use map shows 3-story buildings, but in fact it shows no 3-story buildings. We also asked for side elevations at the last hearing and didn't receive them. And we do need DEP sign-off on the air quality analysis and a response to the applicant's proposal for the Phase 2 scope of work, right? And also, we can't do anything with this finally until HPD signs off on the modification to their, whatever it was, disposition, yeah.
So interesting, I looked at the streetscape study and I went by there, not for visit, but just happened to be going by there. So the streetscape and the building frontage along the 58th Street, I found it to be a very mixed, and it's as a result of the mix of uses. The manufacturing buildings occupy a fairly large portion of the street frontages, as opposed to the residential buildings that occupy depth of, width of 25 feet, whereas the manufacturing buildings are much wider. So even though there may be fewer, if you were to do an absolute number count of how many manufacturing buildings are there compared to residential, yes, in total number, there might be more residential buildings, but the manufacturing structures are much bigger, and they are quite well represented, and they are quite tall, and they are relentless, and they completely front up, they are built up to the street line. So the building mix, building typology, lot line, street line, building heights are very varied. You're right, the land use map is incorrect in showing it. However, based on the Google Street View map, I verified there are buildings that are actually 3 stories, straight 3 stories, not even attic. So I think they need to correct their land use map and their analysis to show that there are 3-story buildings, and these are all along 57th Road. There are 3-story buildings, row houses and the buildings, the front yards, as you notice, they range anywhere from the depth of 2 feet all the way back to some buildings are set all the way back. The building that used to be on this side was set all the way back. So there is no rhyme or reason, there is no consistency, it's really varied. And I think we need to look at the larger neighborhood context, which does show that there is a mix of uses, and this falls very much within the varied building typology, but not totally out of scale.
So you found that the manufacturing buildings were in the 30-foot range?
Well, they
or
were, even though they might be 1-story high, but they're quite
high, but we
high.
don't know what, right? Because they didn't do that work for us.
true.
Right.
However, since they are straight built, they are structures that are just going straight up from the street line, they look a lot more imposing than this building, the proposed building, or any of the residential buildings that are set back from the property line. And this one is set back even more than some of the neighboring buildings, which are 2 feet or 5 feet setback. This is set back more than 10 feet. So I think the appearance of the wall, if as a pedestrian, of this building is going to be a lot less than the building that is right next to it, which is a manufacturing building, which that has a street wall right up to the property line. It might be 20 foot high, may not be 30 foot, but it feels much more taller because it's right up to the street line than this building, which is going to be set back from it. I will feel less of its presence. So I'm just giving the pedestrian experience as I'm
Right,
walking
right.
down the street, and keeping in mind that the building typologies are so mixed. Some are set back at 2 feet, 5 feet, 60 feet. Some are 2 stories, some are 3 stories. It's a basket of medley. So I think this falls within that building mix. It's not 5 stories. It's very much within the scale of
Right.
what we see there. I also don't know why the lesser variance was even submitted. I don't even think it's viable.
Well, I don't know why you would spend all that money on construction to put a laundry room in it, right?
Agreed.
If you're doing it, you create a duplex, which ultimately code may say they have to do because the room may be too small. When you hit 3 units, I believe you need a second means of egress. So then that would convince me that I need to make these a 2-unit building.
I think isn't it, dwelling units of 3 and less don't need to have a second means of egress?
I thought 3
3 and
means
more.
a second means of
Yeah.
egress is required.
3 is the multiple dwelling hit, and that's where, and I've had direct experience where DOB won't allow you to use a hatch where you've got 3 units, and would allow you to use a hatch with 2. So, I don't know, I don't want to decide for them. I just think they need to go check it out with DOB because that's the code review. And multiple dwelling also does have minimum room sizes, as does, I believe, building code. So they
Or
need to
maybe
make
instead
sure.
of this being a 1-bedroom, it becomes a studio.
Right. Yeah, it might need to become a studio. That affects the financials again, right?
I mean, to me, well, the financials, they did address the questions that I asked, but as for making enough room so that the lesser variance is viable, they haven't done that yet. However, it could be done. For instance, one of the major questions that I had to do with the valuation of the site, being that the site really is unusable for manufacturing without that deed restriction being removed. I felt that the site value was too high because it's virtually unusable. This is land that is unusable without action from the city. And so what they did to reflect that comment is they took a 10% discount on that fact, but that's not enough to account for the fact that this virtually has to just stand vacant, almost as if it's somebody's yard without any work. If they were to take that site value down to almost as if the land is somebody's private side, parking lot or backyard or something like that, then 2 units would work. And the income you would get from 2 units would work, especially considering the fact that those 2 units and the 2 parking spots instead of the 3 with the tandem is a better layout anyway.
Right.
And then the use of that cellar area as kind of accessory use to upstairs or extension of that first floor apartment downstairs,
Better,
that works better in terms of layout.
right.
So I think that it could be made viable, basically.
Yeah, but I actually kind of agree that I don't understand why the lesser variance was shown with the same amount of construction costs. It's sort of, it just may, if you're going to show a lesser variance, it's a shorter building or something,
Well,
right?
it reduced the parking space,
Or-
reduce the density, so.
Yeah, Well, it reduces the density, but not the cost of construction.
Right.
So why would you do something like that? It's just, that's not a, you know, it's not a logical reduction in the scope of the project.
I had
Seems-
I
Yeah.
just had a question about the definding. The fact that the site is unbuildable was really because of the action of the owner who demolished the building prior to getting the authorization.
No, the demolition
No, it-
couldn't have happened if city did not approve, grant it. And the reason the demolition was approved by the city was because the building was in absolutely poor condition beyond repair.
Right, but
and
why couldn't they have gotten the city planning authorization prior to demolition?
Well, it
Wasn't
seemed
there a
like they were
demo
told-
order?
They were ordered to demo the building.
And
They
it
were
seemed as
ordered,
if-
or they got the
No,
the
HPD.
condition report? I don't know if they were ordered to demo the building. They decided to demo the...
Building was,
Right, but I mean, they couldn't be used, but the
Then
fact
there's an
that...
existing building on the lot.
Right, it's in bad condition, you go to city planning, you get your authorization, then you wouldn't have to be here.
Right, but at the same time, that's not an as-of-right condition, right? They needed their authorization, so it's not one of the as-of-right uses that's self-creating, it seems to me, right? Because no matter what, they would have had to go to one city agency or another for an extreme kind of an approval. An authorization is almost like going through ULURP, it's like
Well, it's
a
almost
big
like,
deal.
in reading through the statements, it's almost like they didn't expect city planning to say, because they were in conversation with city planning, and then
Yeah.
city planning goes, oh, well, now we can't give you an authorization. You know, sort of like a catch-22.
Right, and so because it's a catch-22, I don't know if we want to make it the owner's fault and the
Right,
owner's
well,
issue.
right.
This isn't a case where the owner, demoed to take advantage of something. They kind of had no choice, and they were caught in the middle, I think, in terms of timing.
Yeah.
Well,
And
maybe they
we
could
shouldn't
explain a
blame
little
them.
bit that if they were ordered to demolish it, or if it was a hazard to somebody.
Right.
You know,
Well,
'cause I
they
didn't get
did
the
say
feeling
it
it
was
was-
a hazard to the neighbors. Didn't they say that it
Did
was?
they?
I
I thought that's what
it
I
was.
read in the statement of facts. Whether they supplied support for that, I don't remember, but the
Okay.
statement of facts said they did.
typically HPD wouldn't allow a owner to demolish unless it was deemed dangerously,
Yeah,
in a dangerous condition, and they would push them to alter it, because that's really what the disposition was, to allow them to alter and modify and continue to reuse it as a residential. And so,
yeah, right. I just don't feel like this is the kind of thing where we see clearly the owner did something to render their site sort of varianceable, right?
and it's not
And-
like they can
right.
build anything on this that is at market rate. There is an AMI cap that HPD is going to put on it as part of its deed restriction. So it's not there's much financial gain that one's going
Right.
to have through this process. If that's-
Just to confirm some things from last hearing, we did speak with city planning. They confirmed that this is not eligible for their authorization. They, of course, can't put anything in writing, they just point to the zoning resolution. That's confirmation. And we spoke to HPD, and as you said, they do want to amend their disposition approval prior to us making a decision. One of the things I would think we might want to keep an eye on is that if the unit count were changed, we would want to make them aware of that. I believe there's a unit count attached to their approval, so
It will be-
if it's 3, if it's 2, they
It
should
actually
know.
is going up. The original approval was for 2 units, I think.
Oh, so, but regardless, we'll
Yeah,
keep
sure,
that
yeah.
line of communication.
All right.
Okay, new cases on the zoning calendar. Item number 1, 2016-4131BZ, 901 Quentin Road, Brooklyn.
We have an approval recommendation from the community board. We have a DOT sign-off for school safety. I don't know if there was any authorization I don't think so, or by the BSA, which there should have been for the trailer classrooms in 1992, or an amendment to the BSA for the two-story townhouse. All that should have gone through the BSA. I mean, I am having, so in reviewing the drawings, I had trouble finding what the requested waivers are. I know that there are front yard waivers, but the plans don't describe them. The aggregate street wall width and heights have to be calculated for the bulkheads to see if they are permitted obstructions within 10 feet of the street wall. That wasn't done. They need to provide zoning calculations for the as-of-right project. The statement of facts also needs to coordinate the floor area with the programmatic needs and zoning charts. They're all different all over the place. With the programmatic needs, I'm a bit confused by the numbers, since it looks like they're combining the girls' and boys' schools sometimes.
Right, but is it that, or is that they're bringing preschool boys from another site? Because I thought initially, like, where did that number jump from?
Right.
And could it be that the girls are coming into this site, which of course we know can't possibly happen, so then it was like, what's going on with the numbers? But then in some parts of that programmatic needs statement, they're talking about preschool and kindergarten boys that are in another location, so I thought, okay, maybe those boys are coming over and that's what's accounting for the gap, but it certainly isn't clear.
The numbers are everywhere.
Those numbers don't add up either.
What'd you
From what I
say?
remember, those numbers don't add up either.
No.
Not in
Right.
elementary school. So
'Cause-
I was
and-
trying to.
Like they say, there's a 770 boys in the 2021 projection, or maybe that's the current occupancy. There's also 1,072 students in 2021.
No, because there's only 678 students currently in
Right.
this school at the site. So for it to jump to the 938 students.
Or the
it's very strange.
1,288
And then, of
students.
course, yeah.
Depends on which page you read.
Yeah.
And also, there's an occupancy chart. I didn't understand what that was. And according to the occupancy chart, it shows there's ample room to support the projected increase, so I didn't know what that's for. I think that might be rated occupancy, and that's not how you occupy a classroom. It's not rated occupancy, it's various laws about how many kids in a classroom. Also, the space utilization table, I didn't know if that's for existing conditions. I think it is. We need the same for the proposed. And also, what happens to the students during the blank periods on the chart? Like, there's these intervals of blank. What do they do?
And what happens in that classroom? Why couldn't those classrooms be used during those, as I call it,
Blanks.
the whiteout period?
Yeah, but sometimes they're only 30 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. I just didn't know what the blanks happened.
Also, it's confusing because the current space utilization table shows that there's actually preschool on the second floor, but there's not supposed to be preschool in the school currently.
Okay.
So that's another issue.
And also, there are lots of color shadings. I don't know what they mean. It made it easier to read, but I didn't know what they mean. And also, it says that students are served 3 meals a day. But so that would be 256 students, according to the number of meals that they say they serve. So that doesn't match any of the counts. So do a lot of the other kids bring lunch? Do they go home? Like, what happens to those other kids? Also, are the meals cooked on site? If yes, I don't understand how that small kitchen handles it. And we need existing floor plans to be able to follow along the changes that are proposed versus the difficulties they're having. I also think there's an error in the calculations for the allowable floor area in the R5. I believe the maximum floor area for community facility use in the R5 is 2 FAR and not 0.75, as shown on the zoning calcs. 0.75 has to do with sleeping accommodations in a community facility, I think. It's section 24-11 to check. There's also, I don't know, they don't show you how much floor area is actually proposed to sit within the R5. It's something like 2,600 square feet, but that's me guesstimating. And it's just to check whether the maximum allowable in the R5 has been exceeded, because that would be another waiver. And not to blend it, I think they're sort of treating it like it's a blended floor area. They're not treating the R5 separately from the C8. And you have to do the same with lot coverage. They seem to be blended. My other question is, why does the Beit Midrash of the existing school need windows on the east side? The existing windows are really small. So then I wonder, why doesn't any of the options show a bus drive up at the first floor with classrooms that extend over it? Or with the building attached to the existing school with a similar configuration like with double-loaded corridor? That would put the play area on East 10th and Quentin, which would give you a better light situation and also give you better relationship to the street in terms of the scale of the building against this residential neighborhood. The as of right also shows a 20-foot drive-through on where only 12 feet is required plus a 4-foot buffer. So then you could enlarge the size of the floor plate in the as of right. And you could also have a cantilever on the upper floors so that you get a bigger floor plate basically, because the drive-through is only at the grade. Also, the as of right doesn't have kind of apples to apples in comparison. On the ground floor, the coat room, security, office, stairwells of the proposed is 6 foot shallower than the as of right. So that would also improve the floor plate of the as of right. And then I also ask why you can't have, for instance, a bus pull-in area like is allowed in section 113-22B, or that the buses pull into the play area for school start and end times, and the rest of the time it's a play area. Like, why can't you do that? I mean, there's a reason why the neighborhood wanted to have these buses get off the street, right? And I know that the applicant says that they haven't had any problems here, but you're increasing the school population, increasing the number of bus drop-offs and all that stuff. And I'd like to know where the buses are stored once the drop-off and pickup is completed. And we need more on building heights, since the proposed is taller than the existing school, so we need more about the area building heights. And they say that there's off-site parking for the teachers, for faculty at the girls' school, which is pretty far from the site. And I'm curious whether the faculty really do that. I mean, you're really going to park at the girls' school and then walk the pretty long distance to this school? And is there actually room, because that school also has teachers who use parking? The land use map shows an auto body shop across Quentin Road from the school. So we often have issues about that subject. So are there spray booths? Are they spraying? Do they have permits, et cetera? We need that information. In the statement of facts, they need to provide updated information on arrival, departure, and parking for the increased capacity of the students and teachers with the build condition. They only talked about what, as far as I could tell, what the needs are today, but not with the build. But because we can't figure out how many people or how many teachers are going to be needed for the build condition, we can't actually understand what that impact is going to be on parking. And also, they show no on-site parking for bicycles, but 100 students bike to school. So why wouldn't you provide bike
Right.
storage?
When you go to the site, there's bicycles attached to everything in the area. Every pole that's around. And the neighbor on East 9th Street has a sign posted on their fence,
Says
no
no bikes,
bicycle
no
parking.
bicycles. Right.
So it's an issue.
And that's an easy fix.
Yes.
Okay. And then also, why aren't they providing all the required street trees? I can't figure that one out unless unless there's a curb cut for the bus, but so far not, so. And also, they don't show any provision to buffer the school use from the neighbor on 10th Street. They need to show fencing and planting, which is significant, as kids playing and noise and all that stuff. They need to show the bulkheads, mechanicals, and fencing in the sections and elevations. And I'd like to know why the first floor is 5 feet above grade. And if a 20-foot floor-to-floor height is needed for the gym, why can't the cellar be excavated further to drop the first floor down? The cellar, as proposed, doesn't align with the existing building anyway, so they can't say it's because we're trying to align floor-to-floor. And I'd also like to know what the need for the 16-foot 3-inch ceiling height in the Beit Midrash is at the second floor. And what is the disabled access to the outdoor recreation area from the public assembly space, which they say in their programmatic needs analysis that they have to have. It's actually up a flight and there's no elevator that gets you down to the play area.
To go to the street and then come back.
Yeah, you have to go outside, right? So that's, and my question is also independent of disabled access. Really, you expect the students to go out onto the sidewalk and walk all the way around to get to the building, to the play area that's right there. And that's it, next.
So, the site visit was very educational for me, in the sense that traffic is quite intense. There is very difficult to find parking there. I did not see school buses parked on the street. There's a school drop-off parking area right on the Quinton between 9th and 10th. It is extremely difficult to find parking there. And so my question leads up most from the traffic point of view is, with the increase in the student capacity, I'm anticipating there will be increase in the number of buses that will be dropping and picking up kids, and more parents coming and picking up the kids, and more bikes. Given the lack of on-street parking condition in the area, I will strongly ask that every effort be made to provide a drop-off and a pickup area on site, and I think it's possible. So the building has a 100-foot depth on 9th Street and a 120-foot depth on 10th Street. So there is a 10-foot rear yard behind the existing building, and there is a proposed 8-foot rear yard behind the proposed building. I think if it can be made to a 10-foot width, you can have a bus that connects from 9th to 10th Street in the back, and you can drop off kids where the play area is and continue going through that rear yard to the 9th
But
Street.
that's putting a lot of stress on the homeowner. What homeowner wants to hear a school bus right outside your window?
But that's all the way through the site.
Right, but still, it's like, that's right there. This is a private home over there. That's not an apartment building, that's a private home. And when somebody buys a private home, I think they have a certain expectation of not having a school bus, literally, we're talking 8 or 10 feet. That school bus is 2 feet away from your wall, along with all of the attendant noise of screaming school children who are screaming on that school bus, because anybody who's ever taken a school bus going to school in this city at any point knows that nobody's sitting there quietly with their hands folded in front of their hands, waiting for, on their laps, waiting to be disembarked. Usually it's screaming mayhem.
Right.
And that's like 2 feet from my window in the morning. I would really be furious.
Yeah.
I mean, that may not be one, but there has to be a way for the
There is a
vehicle,
way.
to drop off and pick up on site.
Yes.
That's all.
So instead of going all the way through the site, which, by the way, that makes it difficult because there's a turn because of the L shape of the site, if you're talking about where the townhouse
Yeah.
currently is, there's a turn that the bus has to make because the site is like a flag, right? But it seems to me, for instance, and I played around with where to put the rectangle. There are a lot of places where you could put the rectangle, and there are a lot of ways to handle this drop-off without passing by a home. You could, for instance, have the drop-off along 10th Street, where it's just a drive-on, drive-off, like a little circular drop-off. You could have the outdoor play area double as the bus drop-off, because it's not like the
The
kids
previous
are...
approval was, I think, from 10th Street, and then you drive from 10th to Quinton.
Right. Right, and then probably they scared the property owners away, and that's why they own the townhouse.
That I believe.
So...
And we just have to be mindful that right across the street is another BSA application which has a parking driveway right across
Right.
from it. So,
Okay, right.
And the other question is that regarding the placement of the recreation at the street level, if they're proposing to provide a recreation a space on the roof of the proposed building, I'm not sure why the existing building's roof, which is much bigger, couldn't have been used for recreation, and thereby you're not always dependent on that recreation space at the ground level. So that could be the third one possibly if and when needed, but you can definitely then use it primarily as a drop-off and a pickup by relocating the recreation on the roof.
Right. But I mean, drop-off is only in the morning and in the afternoon when school's over.
No, or
I mean,
unless you're going for some excursion and you need to, because right now
Right.
that play area does have some, I think,
It has equipment in it.
it has equipment,
Yeah.
yeah. The other question, which goes back to the programmatic, one of the things in the program, it said that there are boys that are being shuttled between campuses, and I wasn't sure which campus they were referring to. Was it the subject campus, and was that the one that was therefore requiring them to expand? I think it would be helpful to provide that clarification. And if that shuttling is happening, what is the frequency and how?
And why?
And why is that
Yeah.
happening? Going back to the placement of the public assembly, if that proposed building is going to be primarily for the graduate students, why is the...
No, high school.
Sorry,
Graduate, high school.
What I meant, high school,
Oh.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
I meant high school. For high school students, why is the public assembly being proposed in that building and not in a building where the primary, the elementary program is? Where are they currently being held? And so it just functionally doesn't make sense that when is it going to be used? And is it like they gathered there during the daytime and then they're shuffled off to their classrooms?
Yeah,
And the rest of
across
and the rest of the time it's just lying empty? Why then do you need that much space for that? Why can't that happen in the existing building? What prevents it from happening? And my question is, where is it happening currently now? And that can also bring the height of the building down and can eliminate some of the bulk requirements. So those were my questions.
So I have questions about about the special permit portion as well as the variance. I don't think that they are paying close attention to the findings you have to make for the special permit and concentrating more on the variance, but there is a special permit here, so they still need to address it. So in terms of finding sites of an adequate size in a district where the use would be permitted as of right, they basically just make a blanket statement that says no vacant land within the 400 feet. But what they need to do is identify what their needs are clearly and then address the issue with as-built sites, already built sites, and vacant sites, and talk about whether or not there are sites that are appropriate for them, and they don't do that. I agree with you, they need to talk about the surrounding uses, because that's also a finding of the special permit, because I believe there is auto repair there, and they don't address whether there's any painting or auto body work going on, or chemicals
The
used.
signboard says that it has a spray paint booth.
Right,
The
but-
sign says that, but I don't know whether the operation's happening inside or not.
Right, but they have to address
Yeah,
this
they
in
have to
their
address
findings.
it, and the EAS doesn't mention it.
Yeah.
And this has been a big issue with our
Yeah.
schools where they have active spray booths, and it's a toxic issue.
And as for the traffic moving through the streets and their own proposed traffic, they're talking about it as if there are very few additional buses that are going to be needed, but that's not true. Because in addition to there being an incremental increase in the student population, it seems like the nature of the student population is changing now and skewing towards younger students, which all come by bus, or a greater number of which come by bus. And so the move to 800 students being younger versus the 486 that are existing currently means that you might have as many as 8 more school buses, not 1 or 2. And so they need to address that increased bus traffic to the site and talk more formally about how they're going to attend to the disembarkation and embarkation of the students. And they don't do that. And then as for the variance portion of the application, I have a question of their numbers and how they arrived at their current numbers and their proposed numbers and their additional growth numbers for this site. I think they have to clarify that and not talk about the girls in the other school and the preschool in the other school unless some portion of that population is coming to this site. And I'm concerned about, for the character finding, about that recreational space coming right up against that home. Because, you know, that was not asked for on their part, and that was never expected to be. And I don't think there's adequate buffering for that. I'm not quite sure about how they're as of right number 3 versus their proposed. It seems like in order to show that that as of right isn't going to work, they talk about how there's a reduction in the number of classrooms per floor from 6 to 4. And what they're doing is they're actually enlarging the 4 classrooms by an extra 130 feet each. And so I don't think that's an adequate comparison because you probably could fit an extra classroom or 2 there that's close to 500 square feet instead of just enlarging 4 and saying, okay, now we have 4 and it's not going to work. So that was my question about that. And let's see, do I have anything else? No, that's...
Just a few additional things. The survey shows a 2-foot 9-inch side yard on the adjacent residential property, but the plans show 0. Generally, when a C8 butts up against an R5, a 15-foot side yard is required, so I think that should be kept in mind in terms of, you know, the impact on the adjacent residents. I was concerned about the height of the building and the bulkheads on that side, the use of the play yard. When I went by, that East 10th is the street that gets all the garbage bags lined up, you know, ready for pickup near the residential property. And I just think that area is getting a lot of use or impact from the school. The other thing was, they said that a certain number of students arrived by car. I didn't know if they drove to the school or if they were dropped off. Because in my neighborhood, a lot of high school students come by car. So I don't know. They should really calculate the amount of trash, because they did say they're going to serve 3 meals a day for like 1,000 students.
Yeah.
And it's all picked up by sanitation. That's a lot of trash.
Yeah. But they did show
A refrigerator. Yes, again, it's near that residential property on East 10th Street. So they're still going to be dealing with that, and it's going to increase.
So what we need to do actually is have it so that they're not storing the trash outside the trash. So for instance.
I don't know when it was going to be picked up, but I saw many
Right.
trash bags.
But at
on
the
street.
moment, I don't know whether they have any kind of interior storage, even though it shows it on the plans of the existing building, but I don't know if they actually have it, because we don't have existing drawings, really. And the other thing is, it seems like if, of course, you have to take the trash out when the sanitation comes, but instead of putting it on the side adjacent to the residence, they could put it, for example, if there was a bus drive-through at the front, then it would go at the front of their, on their property,
Right.
on the building,
Yes.
right, or in front of the building,
Right.
as one example. Or it would go in the play yard on the, in between, if that's where the play yard is.
That's it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Item number 2, 2016-4184BZ, 194 Orchard Street, Manhattan.
This is a PCE with an interesting twist, I thought. So, Community Board 3 unanimously recommended disapproval of this application, and it was a big turnout. It was like 43 members of a 50-member community board, which that's a lot of voters. The disapproval is directed at the developer with whom the community board resolution notes the BSA also has some experience. In fact, maybe one of the applications today is the same. And I think Community Board 3 brings up an interesting question that I don't know if the board has dealt with before, about the board's findings in cases where the property owner benefits from board actions that are really directed at the tenant, where the owner has a long history of flouting building and safety laws. In these PCE special permits, for example, Department of Investigation investigates the tenant, not the landlord. So I'm posing that as a kind of a general question. To the point, in this particular location, there are 10 open ECB violations relating to construction that date to March 2016, and 10 open DOB violations also related to construction dating to June 2016, and fines of at least $4,800 owing to ECB, and I don't know how to calculate the ones that are owed to DOB and haven't matured yet to ECB. True to form, this developer continues to kind of treat city regulatory processes with disdain, it seems to me. We do have fire department sign off and don't have a DOI sign off. And the architect provided plans showing very detailed information on acoustical separations because it's Equinox, and Equinox has a standard way of building. But I'm curious what people think about this subject, if at all.
Well, we're not the ACB court, and the problem is the response will probably be that it's the contractor. And that they were remedying the situation, and some of it had to do with supporting the adjacent building.
Right.
So they remedied that situation, and they're going to cure those violations. I don't see how we can really
Right, that's about the
necessarily monitor.
ECB,
Right.
but about this particular developer who, I think it's a question. Like, I know these are special permits for the tenant, but who benefits?
Right, but
Right?
to me, it's a special, I understand your point, and it is frustrating, but this is a special permit for the tenant, and I think that the intent of the special permit was more to monitor the tenant's possible
Yes.
money laundering, and not really the developer
Right.
sort
I
of
realize that, yeah.
situation. And so, well, because it was to guard against
yeah.
massage parlors.
Yes,
Yeah,
right,
that's what I mean.
yeah, no, I know.
You know, and not the developer, and, if not for this PCE, the developer could rent this as a right to a store and not even come before us. So
Right. No,
for
that's
us to hold the tenant liable for the developer, I think would be unfair to the tenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it's true, but the developer, again, wins. Because I looked up the site, and they've been advertising since 2015 on this development with an Equinox in 3 floors. So that's how the developer sells units. You have an Equinox in your building, et cetera, et cetera.
Say buyer beware.
Right.
And if we outlawed jerks being developers in the city, nothing would ever get built.
Nothing would get done.
Just saying.
Listen to counsel.
Next on the calendar.
Let's go. Item number 3, 2016-4185 BZ 10818 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
Okay, the community board here recommended approval, as is what normally happens with PCs. We do have fire department sign off, but we still need DOI. I don't know why that was. We also need acoustical details to protect the adjoining tenants from vibration and noise caused by the equipment. They didn't show any. And you do have you have an adjoining tenant downstairs, and you have a lot of vibrating equipment. Anybody else?
They did the noise, the parking calculations, they're probably going to be okay because the waiver's for under 40, but they only did the PCE space. They should include the entire building in the
Okay.
parking counts.
else?
That's it.
Okay. Item number 4, 2016-4231BZ, 51 Astor Place, Manhattan.
Yeah, I have to recuse from this one?
Get out.
So this is an application for legalization of PCE, and this PC is in operation, and it is located in the cellar of a commercial building. The applicant has provided some of the drawings. We have no issues from DOI, Community Board has approved it. FDNY, in its letter from 2016, wanted some additional information, and that is regarding the second means of egress be shown on the drawing detailing the path and the terminus from the locker room. I don't think we have any revised drawings indicating that, and I don't know if that still remains an issue with FDNY. I would like to just make sure if that's still outstanding. And since the PCE is operational and the building is occupied, we want to just make sure if there are any issues that has been raised by the occupants, and if the occupants have been notified of this hearing. The applicant has provided details of sound attenuation plan. Since it's built, I think for our record, we want an affidavit from the architect indicating it's been built to the specs that were provided. Anything else?
I thought that the fire department also wanted the fire alarm system scheduled for inspection.
Right, yes. I think they're still awaiting for an on-site inspection, right?
Right, but I think the fire department generally approves it as long as they've scheduled.
Yeah.
Has
So
that
I-
been scheduled? But in their letter, they did said no
Fire department should
objection.
just let us know.
Yeah.
If it's, he can
Yeah.
check if it's been scheduled, and then he usually says it's okay.
And I think everything's, from what I remember, everything's fine. Yeah, it seemed fine. Other than the-
Okay, well, if Anthony will be here tomorrow.
Okay, I think, well, that's it. Come back. Item number 5, 2016-4250BZ, 133 East 58th Street, Manhattan.
58th, right, okay. This is legalization. Community Board waived its recommendation. We do have DOI, we need fire department. It's a very small space, like 1,000-something square feet.
Well, it's, there's a discrepancy.
Yeah.
The statement says 9,345, and the zoning analysis says 1,000 something.
Right. I think the discrepancy was something like, in 2004, there was a DOB application for dance studios or something, and since then, it's whittled down to this 1,000-something square foot space, but they didn't make that clear at all. And,
Yeah.
So I note that the drawings have the standard notes with respect to fire alarms, but not sprinklers. And I just want to make sure that that work is actually going to be done, and it wasn't just kind of blindly putting on the notes. And has it been done? And the applicant needs to provide the fire safety information to the fire department for their review. Anybody else?
The statement says there's no massage offered at this site, but the pictures show what could be used as massage rooms, and I do note that it is physical therapy, but if they could just clarify that.
Clarify, and if it is used for a massage, then just
Then give
provide the
licenses,
licenses.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Item number 6, 2016-4254BZ, 120 Lenox Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, this one was postponed from March 7th. It's a legalization. It opened last year, almost exactly, a little more than a year ago. We still need the community board recommendations. I'm not sure why we still don't have them, because they had time. Yeah. The community board I think the reason this was postponed is because the community board said that they had never received a copy of the application, so by now they should have had a hearing on it. We do have DOI. Fire department conducted an on-site inspection since this last hearing, and they confirmed the sprinklers were installed, but I don't know if we have their sign-off. We don't have sign-off yet.
I think they still have an issue with their inspection for the fire alarm.
Oh, okay, so it's still, okay. Okay. With respect to the punching bags, since they're hung from the ceiling, or they sit on the floor on these little boxes, I'd like to know how the vibration and the banging from the moving bags is attenuated. I don't see from the photos what the flooring material is, but I see the specs show floor mats. But it looks like they really bang and bounce when they're used, that type of punching bag, so. And we provided photos that showed that notice of the hearing was posted in the lobby, which we asked for in our review session in March, so if there's a problem, I guess people will come. Anybody else?
Item number 7, 2017-146BZ, 3722 Neptune Avenue, Brooklyn.
This is the Build It Back application for a special permit under 64-92 for side yard relief. Because it's a masonry building, it requires that the building, you can't lift the building. You could, but it would be crazy, or maybe extremely costly anyway. So what they're doing is they're abandoning the ground floor, and then they move the floor area that was on the second floor, or the ground floor to the top. By doing that, you increase the degree of noncompliance of the side yards. And they're also asking for waivers, as they do in each of these, of the BSA rules. Any other comments, anything?
Will that be heard tomorrow first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Assuming they're here.
Yeah, if they're
Yeah.
here, usually here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. This concludes the public review session for May 15th, 2017.
Although I have bills too.